Now we have already completed 4 examples in land acquisition. By the examples we have already discussed, it should be clear that no direct calculations are involved because, as I already mentioned when we were discussing theory, there are various other enactments or laws are interfering into the Land Acquisition Act. Therefore, we must have knowledge about other enactments also and other laws also, such as Fragmentation Law, Agrarian Development Act, Rent Act, UDA law, NHDA law, likewise, various things. And also, when a land is acquired by the government for a public purpose, we can't just put a figure to the land and the building thereon and pay compensation. Because always the amount we determine is questionable. Means that should be according to the prevailing law of acquisition really. That is, we have to follow Land Acquisition Act Section 6 specifically when we, Part 6, when we assess compensation. When we assess compensation, then we have to take into consideration the theory. Without knowing the theory, we can't assess compensation. Law plus theory. Theory of valuation. Right? Generally, as we discussed, compensation equals market value of the land taken plus disturbance if the entire land is acquired. In our country, most of the acquisitions are for these road development projects. For such projects, only parts of the lands are acquired. Parts of the building, parts of the lands likewise. In such an event, the compensation definition is quite different. There, the compensation equals to market value of the land taken plus injurious affection to land retained and severance plus disturbance. Therefore, we must have a fair knowledge how to calculate market value. What's the definition? Definition is given in section 45(1) when the land is acquired. Definition given is section 45 subsection 1 when the servitude acquired. and severance and injurious affections defined in section 46, 1, Roman 1 and 2, and disturbance, only two things in our act: the loss of earnings and change of residence, section 46.1, Roman 3 and 4, and subsequently some amendments were brought to the act by regulations published under section 63 F of the Land Acquisition Act. And there are various stages where different criteria we use to assess compensation. As we discussed, after 2001, the act, the sections given in the Land Acquisition Act are strictly followed. And after 2001, for some acquisitions, there were some cabinet decisions to pay under large system, LARC system, large system. And those large system was specifically limited to the projects approved by the cabinet. Each and every project, a large system was approved by the cabinet. To be a uniform basis for all the acquisitions, they introduced the National Policy for Payment of Compensation in 2008. From 1st of September 2008, National Policy of Payment of Compensation was introduced. But that was only for that was only for a limited period, for a period of 6 months until 17th March 2017, 2009 really. After that, Regulation 2008 was introduced. Therefore, the whole system of paying of compensation changed by that. Therefore, we must have a fair knowledge about various stages of eras where different valuation criteria are adopted. That should be clear. To reflect them, I have arranged these examples for you. So we have already discussed example 1 to 4, and today I'm going to discuss example 5 and 6. We'll take example 5. A land in extent 0 acre 0 root 7.5 purchase with a single story tenement type residential building depicted as lot 1 in plan number PP GM 2875. This is also important for you to just to have a keep in mind. This PP stands for preliminary plan Mulika Pimbura, GM, Gum for this Gampa district. CEO Colombo, KEK Gold, KG Kurunagal. Likewise, the abbreviations are given for you to identify them easily where this property is. So when they see PP Gum 2875, it means this Gampa district. Located within a commercial belt of a urban council area. I have already explained to you, when it says urban council areas, the different legal background should come to your mind. Pradesh Sabha, urban council, and municipal councils. When we take the Rent Act, if the Rent Act is there, different limits are given for the effectiveness of the Rent Act in 3 types of local authority areas. The other way, the building limit and street lines are important for us to do the valuation. Street lines can be declared only under municipal councils. No street lines, urban councils and Pradesh Sabhas. All those things should come to your mind when we read through this one. Then urban council area has been acquired under the provisions of the Land Acquisition Act number 9 of 1950. When we say Land Acquisition Act number 9, 1950, the part 6 of the act is important for us to do assess the compensation. The relevant notices, orders have been published as under. Notice under section 2, 16/4/2015, order under section 38A, 10/6/2015, notice under section 7, 5/1/2016. When we go through them, the different dates, what should come to your mind is, when we say section 2 notice published this one and 38 on this date, it means no section 4 published in this case. In such an event, section 2 notice becomes intention of acquisition. That's important for us. Intention of acquisitions. Right? Intention of acquisition is important for us to determine whether the regulation 2008 applies for this or not, or any other law also. Application of any other law depends on the intention, date of intention. Therefore, in the case where 38A published after 2000 publication of section 2, no need to publish section 4 notice. Therefore, section 2 notice becomes intention of acquisition. Then when we say 38A, date is prior to section 7 date, because section 7 date is the relevant date for valuation under section 7, then under section 45, then if the section 38 day published before section 7 notice, it means there should be a condition report prepared for that particular property. In such event, what we do is, we do the valuation based on the information in the condition report. According to the condition report prepared, the acquired land has a main road frontage of about 20 feet to a B grade road, and the land lies at the level of the road. The building covers a floor area of 1,200 square feet and it is so 42 years old. From the date of construction, it is occupied by a tenant and the rent paid is the statutory rent as determined by the rent board. Right? By reading those things now, what should come to your mind is the acquired properties tenement type residential building occupied by a tenant from the date of construction. Right? A lot of things should come to your mind since you have the background already learned. First thing is you have to see whether this building has been constructed after 1/1/1980. If a residential building is constructed after 1/1/1980 and given on rent, exempted from the Rent Act. The building is constructed before that, that is coming within the purview of the Rent Act. Here, of course, no need for you to worry because already it says that rent paid is the statutory rent. Therefore, definitely it is coming within the purview of the Rent Act. Now, building is 42 years old, then you have to take 42 years from this date, relevant date. So, 2016, 2074, 2072, 1972, the building constructed, right? 74. Therefore, it's coming within the Rent Act. Now, according to the data collected, the general residential rental value in the locality varies from 750 to 20 rupees per square foot per month. And the commercial site value is around 750 per each at the relevant date. To a depth of about 15 from the front boundary is coming within building limits. Annual value particulars are as below. 73, 950, rate 15%. 2015, 10,000 annual value, rates 20%. All relevant parties have made their claims in respect of Section 7 notice and stated that they are willing to accept the government valuation. In such an event, when we report the valuation, we have to say valuation is subject to Section 17(3). Determine the parties entitled for compensation and assess the amount of compensation to be paid to each party for the land acquired. Okay. A tenement type building acquired, building and the appurtenant land 7.5 purchase acquired. Now building is 42 years old. Therefore, we know under rent that property is tenanted, and we know that after relevant date is 2016. We know that if the intention of Section 4 intention of acquisition is published on or after 17/3/2009, Regulation 2000 applies for this. Under Regulation 2008, we have to pay compensation to the owner as well as to the statutory tenant under the Rent Act. To get the vacant possession, we can get the vacant possession of the property by getting a demolition order under Section 18A of the Rent Act, number 26 of 2002. So, we have to work out the valuation, keeping all those things in our mind. Now we'll see how the approach is answered. Notes. Determination of relevant date. At the very beginning, I explained to you, when we are doing answering questions in land acquisition, you have to give all the clarification or the approach you are, how you do the valuation by notes. Then all the notes explain the whole process of assessment of compensation, right? As I mentioned at the examination, out of 40 marks, you may get over 30 marks for the notes, correct notes given. Therefore, giving notes is very, very important. Determination of relevant date. That's the most important thing in assessment of compensation. This property had been acquired under the provisions of the Land Acquisition Act. According to the section 45(1), the compensation should be assessed as at the date of section 7 notice, which is the relevant date. Accordingly, in this question, the relevant date is 15/1/2016. The section 38A notice has been published prior to section 7 notice, and therefore valuation will be done based on the condition report prepared as at the date of taking over. Note 2. Application of legal provisions. If the intention of acquisition is published on or after 17/3/2009, Regulation 2000 applies for payment of compensation. Intention of acquisition and act is section 4 notice. In this case, section 38A had been published on 10/6/2015 after publication of section 2 notice under the Act, and no section 4 notice published. In such instances, under the provisions of section 38A, section 2 is considered as intention of acquisition, which is on 16/4/2015. Therefore, Regulation 2008 applies for calculation of compensation. Note 3. Note 3. Determination of entitlement for compensation. Section 65 of the Land Acquisition Act applies for this because parties entitled for compensation is interpreted under Section 65. 3.1. Accordingly, owner of the property is entitled for compensation. 3.2. According to the condition report prepared under Section 38A, this property was occupied by a tenant since 1973, and we have to see whether he is a protected tenant. Information says that the occupier pays statutory rent as determined by the rent roll. The statement itself proves that the occupier is a statutory tenant. Further, this property has been constructed before 1/1/1980 and accordingly it is not an exempt property under the provisions of the Rent Act. Under the provisions, the Regulation 2008, a statutory tenant too becomes a party entitled for compensation. Therefore, compensation is to be paid to the tenant too. And there's another way of checking it. If the example some does not say is a statutory tenant, how to find it? We have already learned it. The property is situated in an urban council area. Under the Rent Act, all residential properties the annual value as at 1/1/1968 or if it is percentage after that date, if the annual value is 1,000 rupees or less, such properties are coming within the purview of the Rent Act if the building is given on rent. Here the first assessment is 1973 and the annual value is 950. It means below 1,000. Therefore, this property is situated in the urban council area. Therefore, this property is coming within the purview of the Rent Act. That's the other way we determine whether the property is coming within the Rent Act. පැහැදිලි නේ කනේ මේ ගානෙම කියලා තියෙනවා මේක ව්‍යවස්ථාපිත කුලීකරුවේ පදිංචි නිවසක් කියලා. එම නිසා රෙන්ට් ඇක්ට් වල බලපාන බව හොඳටම අපට පැහැදිලියි. එහෙම නොකිය තිබුණා නම් අපට හොයන්න වෙන්නේ ඇනුවල් වැලියු එක පදනම් කරගෙන. එතකොට 1968 ජනවාරි 1 වෙනිදාට වාර්ෂික වටිනාකම හෝ එම දේපල පළමු වතාවට තක්සේරු කළා ඊට පසුව නම් පළමු වාර්ෂික වටිනාකම රුපියල් 1000ට අඩු නම් මේක තියෙන්නේ urban council area එක නිසා ඒ දේපල ගෙවල් කුලී පනතට විධිවිධාන වලට යටත් වෙනවා. එතකොට ඒකත් මතක තියාගන්න සාමාන්‍යයෙන් කොහොමද අපි ඩිටර්මයින් කරන්නේ රෙන්ට් ඇක්ට් එක බලපානවද නැද්ද කියලා. ගානේ කියලා නැත්තම්. Okay. Note 4. Acceptance of claim. Relevant parties have submitted their claims in response to the Section 7 notice and stated that they are willing to accept the valuation by Government Valuation Department. Therefore, compensation is to be paid subject to Section 17(3) of the Act. What is it? 17 කියන්නේ written claim එකක් ඉදිරිපත් කළ ලිඛිත වන්දිල්ලීමක් ඉදිරිපත් කළා නැත්නම් අපි කොහොමද ඒක වන්දි ගෙවන්නේ කියන එකට තියෙන උත්තරේ තමයි 17 කියනවා. 17 කියනවා අනිවාර්යෙන් ගෙවනු ලබන වන්දි මුදල ඉල්ලන ලබන වන්දි මුදලට සමාන හෝ අඩු විය යුතුයි කියලා. අපි ඉල්ලන ගානට වඩා වැඩි තක්සේරුව තියෙනවා නම් ඒත් අපි ගෙවන්නේ ඉල්ලපු ගාන විතරයි. ඒකයි section 17(3) කියන එකේ අදහස. If the written claim is generally the compensation payable is limited to the written claim made by the owner or the entitled parties. So maybe written claim, maybe oral claim. Written claim or the oral claim. Note 5. Claim for disturbance and other losses. This is a tenanted property, thus considers an investment property. Parties entitled for disturbance compensation, if any, under the context of an investment property. Therefore, owners as well as the statutory tenant are entitled for disturbance compensation under following headings. 3.1 Expenses incurred for appearing for Section 9 inquiry. The 3.1 is the Regulation 3.1. 3.2 Expenses for finding alternative accommodation. 3.3 Cost incurred in change of residence, shifting. 3.12 When an owner of a house or of investment property displaced, additional 10% payment based on market value. This is an investment property, therefore, additional 10% can be paid under Regulation 2008. What do you mean by an investment property? Investment property actually ආයෝජන දේපලක් කියන්නේ මොකක්ද? අයිතිකරු පදිංචිව නැතුව කුලියට දෙන්න හදපු දේපලක් අපි කියනවා ආයෝජන දේපලක් කියලා. නැත්නම් properties constructed for renting out, we call them investment properties because you construct the house and given on rent, and rent is the return you get for your cost. Those are called investment properties. Note 6. Calculation of compensation. There's a change in method of calculation of compensation under Regulation 2008. If a property is occupied by a statutory tenant. 2008 gives the procedure how to calculate compensation if a property is occupied by a protected tenant. Okay. Subsequent amendments to the Rent Act number 7 of 1972 are Rent Amendment Act number 55 of 1980 and 26 of 2002. If a building is occupied by a protected tenant, the protected tenant too becomes an interested party for compensation under Regulation 2008. Keep in mind that if the relevant date is before 17 March 2009, we don't pay compensation to the tenant. We don't pay compensation to the statutory tenant. Okay. I clearly explained to you, if the relevant date when a property with the protected tenant is acquired, if the relevant date is before 24th of October 2002, that's the effective date of Rent Amendment Act number 26 of 2002. In such an acquisition, the compensation should be based on the authorized rent and paid only to the owner. In between 24th October 2002 and 17th March 2009, compensation is assessed based on the market value of the property if vacant possession can be obtained under Section 18A or 22 of the Act. In such event, compensation will be paid only to the landlord, owner, and not to the tenant. Tenant is not getting any compensation. Right? After 17/3/2009, both parties, statutory as well as the owner, both are getting compensation. Keep that in mind. Right? To test your knowledge, the relevant date will be given in between those periods I discussed. Okay. That's why different dates are given. Again, you must know why we do so. Because we have to apply Section 45(1) market value definition. What does it say? If that particular property is put in the open market by a willing seller, what is the amount you are getting? If a property is occupied by a protected tenant, we can't get him ejected. If we can't get him ejected, the buyers will stick on to the authorized rent-based market value. If the buyer can get the vacant possession based on the prevailing law by getting a diversion node or so, then he will go for the open market rental value of that particular property to determine the compensation. Those complications you keep in mind. That's very important. Okay, little complicated, but clearly you can keep in mind. දෙදස් සතරේ ඔක්තෝබර් 24 2002 ඔක්තෝබර් 24 ඉස්සරලා ගෙවල් කුලී පනතට යටතේ වැටෙන ගොඩනැගිල්ලක් අක්වයර් කරොත් වන්දි තක්සේරු කරන්නේ ඕතරයිස්ඩ් රෙන්ට් එක බේස් කරගෙන. It's a very small amount. මොකද හේතුව අපි ඉන්ටර්ප්‍රිට් කරන්නේ section 45(1) වල තියෙන market value definition එක ඉන්ටර්ප්‍රිට් කරන්න නිසා. මම කීවේ අපට පුළුවන් නම් vacant position එක ගන්න. ඒ building එක ඒ කියන්නේ tenant අයින් කරන්න පුළුවන් නම් නීතිය යටතේ. ඒ අයින් කරන්න පුළුවන් ක්‍රම දෙකක් තියෙනවා 18 18A 22 18 යටතේ demolition order එකක් ගන්නවා. නැත්තම් 22 යටතේ කාරණා හතක් තියෙන. ඒ කාරණා හතරේ vacant position ගන්න පුළුවන් නම් බයර් කෙනෙක් කල්පනා කරනවා මේ property එක මිලදී ගත්තාම අපට මේගොල්ලෝ අයින් කරලා vacant position ගන්න පුළුවන් අපිට development එකක් කරන්න පුළුවන්. Right? For that we deduct the cost of getting vacant position. ඒක තමයි සාමාන්‍ය criteria. ඒ නිසා ඒක හොඳට මතක තියාගන්න. So calculation of compensation. If a building is occupied by a protected tenant, the protected tenant too becomes an interested party for compensation under Regulation 2008. In assessing compensation, we have to look into whether it is possible to get the vacant possession in order to value the property based on market value as defined in section 45(1). There are two ways of getting vacant possession under the Rent Act, Rent Amendment Act number 26 of 2002. Under section 18A, a demolition order can be obtained where the building over 40 years old, or under section 22, a court case can be filed to eject the tenant. In this case, the building is 42 years old and therefore a demolition order can be obtained under the provisions of Rent Amendment Act number 26 of 2002 after paying compensation to the tenant as stipulated under section 18A. In the process of valuation, the following steps are to be followed. 1. Assessment of market value of unencumbered freehold interest. Only land value will be assessed. Because building is too old, depending on the location of the property, we can determine the value of the property with the including the land and the building. Since the building is over 40 years old and we are obtaining a demolition order, then we don't add any value for the building. We go on the bare land value. Second, assessment of market value of encumbered freehold interest. First, you have to value the unencumbered freehold interest, then encumbered freehold interest. Necessary deductions for compensation to the tenant, litigation cost and time factor will be taken into account. Property is encumbered, legally encumbered because statute and is there. To get him ejected, we have to spend some money as compensation for tenant and to file the case in courts and also time factor. All those things, three things you have to take into consideration when determining value of encumbered freehold interest. 3. Assessment of market value of statutory tenancy in order to determine reasonable compensation under section 18A. The compensation to be paid to the tenant is specifically specified in section 18A. Reasonable amount. So we have to determine what is the reasonable amount of compensation to the tenant. A lengthy process. Market value of statute gained by a tenant will be assessed with deductions for impact on marketability as the statute rights of the tenant is not marketable. Tenant rights, no market. We have to take that factor also into account when we determine the market value of the statutory tenancy. We'll see how we do it. We have already done it to, if you have gone through the notes, of course, it's very clear. Then apportionment of compensation under section 46(1). Section 46(1) says compensation should be based on the market value of the property and should be proportionate to the interests. First, we have to determine the parties entitled for the compensation, the landlord and statutory and both. Then we have to, first, after determination of market value of the property, unencumbered period interest, then we have to apportion it between the owner and the tenant according to the ratio we work out. Okay. Now, answer the calculation. Assessment of authorized rent, standard rent. 7(1). Section 6 of the Rent Amendment Act number 26 of 2002 says the rent assessed under Amendment Act number 55 of 1980 should not be less than the rent that could be assessed under 1972 Act. Therefore, if a property is tenanted, we have to calculate the authorized rent under both acts. Rent under 1972 number 7 Act and also rent under 1980 number 55 amendment. Now, we'll see how we calculate rent under Act number 7 of 1972. The formula is given in the Act. Annual value as at post assessment 950. At rates to 15%, 142.50. So the standard rent comes to 1,092.50. Add payment permitted increase 6% of standard rent is given in the Act. 6%. So 6% out of this 65.55. Then difference between rates. Earlier rates 122.50. Current rates 2,000. 20% out of 10,000 is 10,000 is the annual value. Current year, there are 2015. Out of 20% out of that is 2,000. So difference between rates 1,857.50. When added all three together, the authorized rent comes to 3,015.55. Now we have to see what is the authorized rent under Act number 55 of Amendment number 55 of 1980. Current annual value 10,000. Current rates 20% too. So the standard rate comes to 12,000. Under Section 6 of the Rent Act, the authorized rent is determined at 12,000, which is the higher. මේ දෙකෙන් 72 වටිනා සම්මත කුලියත් 80 පරතරය ගණනය කරන සම්මත කුලියත් දෙකෙන් වැඩි එක තමයි අපි ගන්නේ ඔතරයිස් රෙන්ට් එක විදියට. සම්මත කුලිය නැත්නම් අනුමත කුලිය විදියට. අපි කීවා අපි ඉස්සරලාම ඩිටර්මයින් කරනවායි කියලා bare land value එක නැත්නම් market value of unencumbered freehold interest. Land area 7.5, perch value 750,000 per perch, then 750,000 per perch at 7.5 works out to 5,625,000. No value for the building as it is old, and also we are supposed to get a demolition order. Okay. Then the second stage, the access compensation to the tenant should be 150,000 or 20% of chief valuer's valuation or 10 years of annual value, whichever is higher. Therefore, 150 is there. The 10 years of annual value, of course, annual value 10,000 given, and into 10 is 100,000. Then we have to see what is the chief valuer's valuation. We assume that chief valuer will take into consideration the building as at the date of valuation, the condition as at the date of valuation, relevant date. Okay. This is a tenanted building, square area 1,200 square feet. Generally, how we calculate rental value is we collect rental comparisons in the open market and find out rate per square foot, and we compare that with the rental evidence with the rent to be assessed and adopt a rate. The sum says the rental value for residential properties varies from 750 to 20 rupees per square foot in the open market. This is a tenanted property and the building is 42 years old. It's not that attractive, and generally tenanted properties are not properly maintained since the rent from those properties are getting low because of the Rent Act. සාමාන්‍යයෙන් කුලියට දෙන ලද දේපලක් ගෙවන්නේ ගෙවල් කුලී පනතේ තියෙන කුලිය නම් අයිතිකරු සාමාන්‍ය රූටින් රිපෙයාර්ස් කරන්නේ නැහැ. එහෙම වෙලාවට කන්ඩිෂන් එක එන්න ඩිටීරියෝරේට් වෙනවා. එම නිසා අපි සලකනවා කුලියට දෙන ලද දේපලේ මේ කාර්ය මේ ඇසෙස්මන්ට් එකේදී lowest rental value එක අපි දානවා. Rental values they say 750 to 20. Therefore, we adopted the lowest rate per square foot 750. 1,200 into 750. 9,000 rupees per month. 9,000 into 12, 108,000. Investment basis of valuation, we know net income multiplied by a YP equals market value. Net income multiplied by YP. Lowest possible we use for this particular type of building. Generally, we use 3 to 5% rate of return for residential buildings. Lowest is 5%, it means 20. So we use 20 to multiply this tenanted property. Then net income multiplied by YP 20, the market value comes to 1,620,000. This is we consider as the chief valuer's valuation for this particular building. Based on the law, Rent Act. Out of that, the excise take 20%. 20% out of 1,620,000 is 324,000. $324,000. So the reasonable compensation is 324,000 according to the Act. The highest out of these three. But the access further, we have to pay reasonable compensation. So we have to see that this is the reasonable amount. Under these three, the maximum is 324. මේ තුනෙන් වැඩි මේක 3,24,000යි. නමුත් මේක අපිට determine කරන්න බෑ reasonable කියලා. හේතුව the reason is the owner is, because of the protection given under the Rent Act, owner is enjoying something more by occupying that property, paying a lesser rent than the market rental value. It means he is getting some rental benefit because of the statutory tenancy. යස්ථාපිත කුලීකරුවෙක් වෙන නිසා පදිංචිකරු සාමාන්‍ය නීතිය නිසාම වැඩිපුර ප්‍රමාණයක් භුක්ති විඳිනවා වටිනාකම. අපි ඒක හොයන්න ඕන. සාමාන්‍යයෙන් වාර්ෂික වටිනාකම chief value valuation එක අනුව කියනනේ වාර්ෂික කුලිය 108,000 කියලා. එතකොට මේ 108,000 වලින් අවුරුද්දටම එයා ගෙවන්නේ 10,000යි. එතකොට 98,000 එයා ලබනවා rental benefit එකක්. You understand that? Because of the coverage given by the Rent Act, he is paying only 10,000 rupees per month. But in the open market, the rental value of that particular building is 108,000. Because of the benefit he got, the coverage he got under the Rent Act, he is enjoying 98,000 rupees a rental benefit. because of the rent law. We must see the market value of such a rental benefit. For that, YP at 5% for I have taken 23 years. It means I have determined the lifespan of the building as 65 years. Now it is 42 years old. Building will be there for another 23 years. Therefore, you have taken 23. So if you determine that building will be there for 100 years, then you can take 58 years. Now building is with 22 likewise. So YP at 5% for 23 years, assuming future lifespan up to 65 years. Price fashion table 13.4886. Then the market value comes to 1,321,882. Another problem arises there. What is it? Although the market value of the rental benefit is 1,321,882, the tenant can't put that in the open market, his rights, and sell it in the open market. No provisions given in the Rent Act to sell his interest. He can't. Other than a successor after his death, given in section 39, I think. Okay. Therefore, non-marketability factor, I have deducted less 25% for impact on marketability or non-marketability. Then market value of rental benefit of self-tenants comes to rupees 991,411. So the reasonable compensation to the tenant under section 18A of the Rent Act is determined at 991,411. Okay. Try to understand. I explained this when I was doing Rent Act to you. And again, the same thing here, same calculations. Therefore, please study them. You may be tested at the examination sometimes. Now, if a property is occupied by a protected tenant, and if such property is acquired under the Land Acquisition Act, after 2009 March 17, we have to pay compensation to both parties, to the landlord or the owner as well as to the tenant, statutory tenant. To pay compensation, we have to calculate unencumbered freehold interest of the property. We have already calculated. Then we have to calculate the compensation to the tenant, that also now calculated. The third, we need to calculate the market value of encumbered freehold interest. The freehold interest encumbered by the statutory tenant. That is how that becomes encumbered. That is how unencumbered freehold interest became encumbered. Right, we'll see how to calculate. Market value of unencumbered freehold interest already determined at 5,625,000, 7.5 purchase at 750,000 per purchase. Less compensation for the tenant determined 991,500, 990,000 for 411. I have already to for 500. Litigation cost as estimated, I estimated because 2 years take to file case and get the vehicle demolition order. Then I have estimated that 100,000. So altogether cost is 1,91,500. The balance comes to 4,530,500. For the process, to get the vacant possession, it takes about 2 years because we know the process. The owner has to make an application to the National Housing Commissioner. National Housing Commissioner has to write to the chief valuer and get the valuation for that particular building. Then he has to calculate 20% out of that market value and determine which is the highest amount. Then to determine the statutory benefit of the tenant, and by doing so, we can determine the amount to be paid to the tenant. Now, that amount we have to deduct from the open market value of that particular property and litigation cost. Then, after getting that, the owner has to file a case in district court and get that determined. For that process, we assume that it takes about 2 year period. Therefore, we defer this amount for a period of 2 years. Generally, we take 10%, is closer to the treasury bill rate, right? If you take 8.5% or 8% treasury bill rate, that's okay. That's the base. Keep that in mind. I have taken 10. So when we defer it for 2 years, market value of encumbered freehold interest comes to 3,746,484. So this is the total compensation. We have to apportion this between these two amounts. Tenants amount 991,500, landlords amount 3,746,484. So we have to apportion compensation accordingly. Freeholder share, total compensation this much. This is a tenant share, this is a landlord share. Out of these two, the landlord share is this one. So out of this, landlord share comes to 4,447,961. Similarly, out of these two, this much tenant is getting. So out of this 5,625, tenant is getting 1,177,039. So therefore, compensation for the owner is 4,447,961, and compensation for the statutory tenant is 1,177,039, both subject to section 17(3). So if you are keeping with the current affairs, an act to abolish the Rent Act is presented in the Parliament, and that was taken up about 1 month back, and first reading is over. For the second reading, They have put that for calling for public opinions. After 1 month, that will be again presented to the parliament and passed in the parliament. If that act is passed, as valuation students, you need not worry about the rent act and calculate all these calculations, right? Because these rent tax will not be there anymore. But keep in mind, as valuers, you should know these things because still we may have to calculate compensation if the relevant date is before 2026. Okay, therefore, you can't just forget about this thinking that the act will be abolished. No, but as valuers, you must know this. Okay, therefore, go through them and be thorough on procedure, how to assess compensation under the Rent Act, and be ready with that to apply them in practical situations. දැනට පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ මේ දවස්වල පාර්ලිමේන්තුව ඉදිරිපත් කරලා මේ රෙන්ට් ඇක්ට් එක අවලංගු කරන්න පනතක් පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ දැනට තියෙනවා. ඒක මාසෙක් කල් දීලා තියෙනවා ඊළඟ සෙකන්ඩ් රීඩින් එකට යන්න. මහජන අදහස් කැඳවලා ඉතින් මහජන අදහස් කැඳවලා ඊට පස්සේ ඒක පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ සම්මත කරොත් රෙන්ට් ඇක්ට් එකේ තියෙන මේවා බොහෝ වෙලාවට නැතුව යනවා මේ පහසුකම්. රයිට්? එතකොට බොහෝ වෙලාවට ටෙනන්ට් කෙනෙක් එනවා නම් අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම ලීස් ඇග්‍රීමන්ට් එක සයින් කරන්න වෙනවා. ඒ ලීස් ඇග්‍රීමන්ට් එක රෙජිස්ටර් කරන්න වෙනවා ලෑන්ඩ් රෙජිස්ට්‍රියේ. රෙජිස්ටර්ඩ් ලීස් ඇග්‍රීමන්ට් එකක් නැතුව ගෙයක් කුලියට එන දෙන එකක් නෑ අනාගතයේදී ඒ පනත සම්මත වුණොත් පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ. හරි? ඒ වගේම වේකන්ට් පොසිෂන් ගන්න නම් උසාවි යන්න ඕනේ අර දෙන ලීස් ඇග්‍රීමන්ට් එකේ තියෙන කවනන්ස් අනුව. රයිට්? ඒක තමයි සාමාන්‍ය ක්‍රමය. Okay. This is the end of amendment, this example 5. So we'll discuss example 6 after another 15 minutes time. I'm taking a break of 15 minutes. Okay. Hello. Give me. Hello. Hello. Can anybody answer? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Right. Start now. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Now, the last example. Possession of the property bearing assessment number 22 Main Street, situated in a suburban town, has been taken over for a public purpose under the provisions of the Land Acquisition Act number 1950. The data collected from the acquisition file maintained by the acquiring officer are given below. Publication of notices, orders. Section 2, 12/2/2005. Section 4, 25/2005. Section 38A, 28/10/2005. Section 7, 25/12/2005. Survey plan details. Number PP Co 8875, Co means Colombo. Lot number 1. Extent 0 acre 0 root 20.5 purchase. Description: cooperative shop and land. Occupier: cooperative society. Claim for compensation for loss of land owner 25 million. To injurious affection and severance 5 million. For loss of rental income for 5 years 300,000. Claim by cooperative society for loss of earnings and improvements 1 million. According to the condition report prepared, the land is rectangular in shape, generally flat, and has a frontage of 60 feet to a B grade road. Width of the road is 40 feet. The building is 45 years old and covers a floor area of 945 square feet with a frontage to 27 feet. The occupier cooperative society, monthly tenant since 1972, has added the storeroom to the rear of the building in size 405 square feet in June 2005. Economically, building is obsolete. Data collected on field inspection are as below. Assessment number 35 Main Street. Land in extent 12.5 purchase with a two-story commercial building covering a floor area of 835 square feet in each floor has changed hands in 2004 for rupees 9.5 million. There's a new building under construction in this land now. Assessment number 12, Main Street. A commercial building with the protected tenant has changed hands for rupees 3,250,000 in December 2004. The purchaser has spent another 3 million to get the vacant possession. The extent of the land is 6.2 purchase. This land too is being substituted by a new building now. The general commercial rental value in the town varies from rupees 750 to 10,000 per square foot per month. According to the books of accounts, the annual net income for last 3 years is as below. Year ending 31/3/2005, 250,000. Year ending 31/3/2004, 220,000. Year ending 31/3/2003, 200,000. Details collected from Urban Council Law as below. Year 1961, annual value 765, rate percentage 15. Year 1968, annual value 985, rate percentage 15. Year 1969, annual value 985, same, but rate percentage 20. 2005, annual value 10,335, rate percentage 25%. Determine the amount of compensation to be paid to the persons interested, indicating relevant sections of the Land Acquisition Act. Now, if we go back to the start, for your future use, I am telling this. When you are giving an assessment number, always that should be followed by the name of the street. Assessment number 22 Main Street. Right? There can't be an assessment number without the name of a street. And when we take the acquisition procedure, acquiring officer or the divisional secretary now is the person who is having the acquisition file. He is the person who is publishing all the notices under the act with the consent of the land ministry. Therefore, all the information regarding this acquisition is there in the acquisition file in the acquiring officer. Now, in this case, Section 2 notice published, Section 4 notice published, Section 38A published, and Section 7 published. So the Section 38A published before the Section 7 notice, therefore, possession of the land had been taken over before the relevant date. Therefore, there should be a condition report for us to do the valuation. And here the details of survey plan given. This is a survey plan in Colombo district. Extent is given their acquired property. Then the occupier also given their cooperative society. Again, the claims have made loss of land 25 million, injurious effect and severance 5 million, for loss of rental value income for last 5 years, 300,000. When information given like this, we have to, when we are giving an answer, we have to give answers to all the things here. Whether they are entitled for that claim or not, we have to mention. Then the cooperative society, loss of earnings and improvements they have claimed. Other details are given here. The frontage, of the building, and they have added in 2005 June, they have added 405 square feet storeroom to the building. Right? There's some legal background in this one also, because under section 48 of the Land Acquisition Act, there are 8 matters that to be ignored when assessing compensation. One is improvements done after publication of section 4 notice are not considered when assessing compensation. It's a new thing in an example, right? We'll be discussing them. So all aspects in the compensation assessment procedure are included in those examples for you to get a complete knowledge. Okay. Then, as valuers, land value we fix based on the sales evidence in the open market. To do a valuation, we have to collect sales evidence from the market in that particular area and analyze them and compare with the property to be valued, then a rate should be adopted. For that purpose, two sales evidences are given in this sum. So you have to analyze them and determine a rate per purge that could be adopted to value the property acquired for payment of compensation. Okay. Then the rental evidence also is given. If we are doing the valuation on investment basis, rental evidence is also important for us. You have already learned the comparison basis of valuation, land sales comparison, rental comparison. In the open market, we collect rental comparisons and analyze them and determine rate per square foot, and then compare that particular one with the property to be valued and adjust the rate according to the condition of the property to be valued with compared to rental evidence. That's the normal thing. So for you to give a knowledge about basic principles of valuation also, this example is used. And again, if you are assessing compensation for loss of earnings, These details are given there, right? Then by looking at this, you can say year by year, the profits are increasing. If it is so, when we adopt the YP, we can go for the maximum YP. It means 3, maximum 3 we can use this for this calculation of loss of earnings if arises. Okay. Then other details are given here for you to determine whether this property is coming within the purview of the Rent Act. If it is coming within the purview of the Rent Act, you can use these details to determine it. Okay. At the end, it says determine the amount of compensation to be paid to the persons interested, indicating relevant sections of the Land Acquisition Act. As usual, we have to determine the persons entitled for compensation and then assess the amount of compensation. Now we will see how we are proceeding. As usual, first you have to explain the procedure by notes. All the problems involved in this one, all the complications involved in this question are resolved by different notes given in the answer. So if you are given the correct note, that reflects that you have the full knowledge about the Land Acquisition Act or the procedure of assessment of compensation under the Land Acquisition Act. Okay. We will proceed. Note 1. As usual, this property had been acquired under the provisions of the Land Acquisition Act. According to Section 45(1), the compensation should be assessed as at the date of Section 7 notice, which is the relevant date. Accordingly, in this question, the relevant date is 25/12/2005 is the date of publication of Section 7 notice. The Section 38A notice has been published prior to Section 7 notice, and therefore valuation will be done based on the condition report prepared as at the date of taking over. Note 2. Under the regulations published in Extraordinary Gazette number 130517 dated 9/10/2003, any premises of which the landlord or the tenant is a cooperative society registered under the Cooperative Societies Law number 5 of 1972 is exempted from Rent Act number 7 of 1972. So cooperative society is a multi-tenant and therefore it is not entitled for compensation. Look at that. Property is occupied by the cooperative society. That property acquired. They are claiming compensation for the improvements done and the loss of earnings. But because this regulation published under Extraordinary Gazette number 1305/17 If the cooperative society is a tenant or a landlord, such properties do not come within the purview of the Rent Act. Then what will happen? This clause determines that cooperative society is not a statutory tenant. Just look at this. This is an urban council area property is located. This is a commercial property. If the annual value is less than 1,000 rupees, 2,000 rupees, as at 119068, such properties are coming within the purview of the rent tax. If that property was occupied by another person, that is coming within the rent tax. But this is occupied by a cooperative society. Because of that extraordinary gazette regulation, the cooperative society is exempted. Therefore, he becomes a multi-tenant. What will happen? Under section 65 interpretation, it says multi-tenants are not entitled for compensation. Therefore, cooperative society is not entitled for compensation. Now, another problem is there. What's that problem? Cooperative society has done some improvements to the building, spending some money. Can they get that under this acquisition? We have to see. So, as per section 65, only the owner is entitled for compensation as the cooperative society becomes a multi-tenant. Multi-tenants are not entitled. Okay. 4. The building is economically obsolete and the land has development value. Hence, market value based on development value is to be paid for the land. To arrive at the market value of land, market data are analyzed as below. Assessment number 35 Main Street. Consideration 9.5 million. Extent of land 12.5. Value per perch works out to 760,000. Main Street land in extent 12.5 purchased with a two-storied commercial building covering a floor of 800 square feet in each floor has changed hands in 2004 for 9.5 million. There's a new building under construction in this land. It means after purchasing the old building covering floor area of square feet 835 has been demolished and new building is coming in. Therefore, this money, entire money goes for the value of the land. Therefore, we can divide this by the extent of the land and find out the market value per perch. So 9.5 million divided by 12.5, 760. Assessment 12 Main Street. Consideration passed for 3,250,000. There had been a tenant and the owner has spent 3 million to get the vacant position, to get him ejected. It's a under table transaction. අතයට ගන්න දුවක් වෙලා the total spent is 6,250,000 for the entire land. There are also a new building is coming up, constructed. It means all building already demolished. He has spent total amount this much. That works out to, when divided by extent, works out to value per purge 1 million. Owner has claimed compensation for injurious affection. Entire land acquired. Injurious affection and severance arises if a part of the land is acquired. Since entire land has been acquired, this claim does not arise in this case. Compensation for injurious affection shall not be paid since the whole land is acquired. Compensation for loss of rental income shall not be paid since the base for market value is the rental income. If we really value this property on with the building, we have to go on the rental value of the building. So rental value is the base for the calculation, the investment basis. Therefore, we don't pay any more money for the loss of rental value. That is already included in the market value. 8. Compensation for loss of earnings and improvements will not be paid to the occupier as the tenant was running the business. Now, to get the compensation for the improvements or anything, this is very important. You have to get an ownership to the property. Under 10(1)(a) decision, that's the decision of ownership. Only the people who are entitled for compensation is determined under 10(1)(a). If the 10(1)(a) decision does not contain any name of the claimant, we can't pay any compensation to such persons. Here the cooperative is a tenant, no compensation will be paid to the tenant. Therefore, for the improvements also, we can't pay any money because he is not the party entitled for compensation. Okay. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Section 48 matters to be ignored are given there in Section 48. Okay. So, any improvements done after publication of Section 4 notice are not considered in assessment of compensation. Right? Therefore, improvements done by the cooperative society, for the improvements done by the cooperative society, compensation cannot be considered paid. Now, two things are there. Only one thing is mentioned here. One is to get the compensation, the person must have some interest to the property. If he does not have any interest, he is not eligible for compensation. That's the first one. Secondly, if the person is entitled, even he is entitled, we assume that the cooperative society is entitled for compensation, but he is not getting any compensation for the improvements done because under Section 48, matters to be ignored are given, eight causes are given there. If improvements are done after publication of Section 4 notice, for such improvements, compensation cannot be paid. What's the argument behind that? Generally, it means owner should not try to increase the value of the property by doing any changes, and the burden on money to be paid, this burden on money to the government should not be done. මොනවා හරි ඒ වගේ ඉම්ප්‍රූව්මන්ට් එකක් කරා නම් වැඩි වන්දියක් ගෙවන්න වෙනවා. ඒක නවත්තන්න තමයි section 48 වල matters to be ignored කියලා කාරණා කීපයක් දීලා තියෙන්නේ. right. එතකොට මේ property එකේ obsolete building එකක් තියෙන්නේ. Normally development value can be paid for this building also, and we have determined for purchase value 800,000 for this land, and 20.5 into 800,000, 16.4. The total compensation is 16.4 million. Right. Miss Gitmi, are you there? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Now I have completed this. What I have to do? What about rating valuation? Is Mr. Nanakar doing it or not?
Yes, sir, I guess so. Pratap
didn't
sir
talk
told
to him,
me
no?
to inform.
You didn't talk to him, no?
I guess Pratap sir has talked, sir.
Yeah, because yesterday I met him and I asked him whether he's doing. He said so far not informed him. Just
Ah,
rewind Mr. Dr. Pratap.
yeah, sir, I remind him.
Yes. Now, give me one thing. Ask all the students if they have any questions. Sometimes I may be able to take up a physical session on a Thursday,
Ah, okay, sir.
right? So if they tell all the students if they have any questions, the places where they have to get them clarified, I may be able to come to the university on a Thursday, most probably say 9 to 12 or so in the morning, or even after maybe better in the morning session, and we can have a physical session also to get everything clarified. Okay, if they
Okay,
like,
sir.
of course I can come.
Okay,
Tell
sir.
them, man, get ready. Okay,
Okay, sir.
right. I'm going to stop there now.
Okay, sir, thank you.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Rashmika, රශ්මික ඔයා තමයි host ඉන්නේ meeting එක end කරන්න. Okay, thank you.